What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four, and the ending of this video is going to be probably the most important thing in this video, and will basically set the stage for like one of the most epic moments ever in the history of Marvel Comics. But what this does here is this initially opens up with the Fantastic Four basically facing off against Bentley Whitman, also known as Wizard. Now here's the thing, Wizard's basically a guy who's super intelligent. With regards to this particular bit of the story, it's not overly important, but anybody who knows anything about Jonathan Hickman knows everything he does become important somewhere along the line. So while the Wizard, I will say he's defeated pretty easily, right? I mean, this is literally like 3 or 4 pages. It's just not overly important. While the Wizard is defeated, one of the things the Fantastic Four learn is that the Wizard had actually been creating clones of himself. Now, as a super intelligent guy, the Wizard initially made his bones by just developing incredibly advanced technology and then just selling it off to the rich and the powerful, and then just became incredibly rich because of that. But then he ultimately ended up becoming a criminal, and he just joined the Frightful Four and faced off against the Fantastic Four in the old Stan Lee, Jack Kirby days, and he's never really been a major villain in the Marvel Comics universe. But the thing about this is that one of the things that he had done is he actually created one of the more newer clones, which is a child version of himself named Bentley 23. And so in the face of the fact that he had basically been cloning himself, and the face of the fact that like this little kid is here, what they end up doing is following his defeat, they actually adopt Bentley 23, or just kind of bring him into the fold. But following that, one of the things that happens here is you have this discussion between Reed and Susan, where when it comes to Susan Storm, one of the things to know, as far as Reed goes, his intelligence is one of those things where he's always kind of removed from everything that's going on, right? He's there, but he's not there, right? He's present, but he's always thinking about a million other things. Now, the relationship between Reed and his family is probably the single most important part of this video that we're talking about outside of the ending of this video. And the reason for that is because if you guys recall the video that we did on basically the Dark Reign story, that Reed Richards had come to this realization that in order for the Earth to become a better place, right? When he looked at all these different alternate realities where Civil War had happened, the formation of the Illuminati, all that kind of stuff, secret invasion, and so on and so forth, he came to the realization that in all these alternate realities where things turned out peacefully, it was because he only ever did things on his own, that he didn't invoke the Illuminati, that he was never part of Civil War, just things along those lines. And so as a result of that, Reed had come to the conclusion that he needed to solve the problem of everything. But during that story, he had constructed the bridge, which is what allowed him to see in alternate realities in the first place, and was ultimately met by the arrival of just these disembodied people who simply said, like, we will be here when you're ready. And so ultimately Reed does exactly that. He literally opens the bridge, contacts these people, only to find out they're alternate reality versions of him. And so bringing him in, right, when he basically follows because he's curious to see what this is all about, he's basically taken to a place called the Citadel, which houses a group known as the Council of Reeds. Now, one of the cool things about this, and the way that this is explained to us, that this Council of Reeds is composed of a variety of Reed Richards from alternate realities, and they differ in a variety of different ways. For example, one of these Reed Richards looks like he's basically Xavier from an alternate universe, meaning he's probably a mutant, and he has the ability of telepathy, so on and so forth. That some versions of Reed Richards have the power of the Silver Surfer. That other versions of Reed Richards, the powers were shifted. So instead of Johnny Storm becoming the Human Torch, it was Reed who became the Human Torch instead. Now, there is going to be a much darker component to this Council of Reeds in a few different ways. But before any major questions are answered, what ends up happening is there's basically what's referred to as a Galactus incursion, meaning Galactus has arrived on Earth in an alternate reality with the intention of consuming it. And so one of the things that Reed learns when he's brought into this council is that it was created by one guy, but there's actually 2 other versions of Reed that rule alongside him. That these 3 versions of Reed Richards all have an Infinity Gauntlet. Now, one of the things that's basically given to us here is that the Infinity Gauntlet is more ceremonial than anything else, and it's basically designed to show their place in, as far as ranks go, among the Council of Reeds, that they're the leader of the council. And the reason for this is because back in the 1990s, and it's really solidified here by Jonathan Hickman, that you had an Infinity Gauntlet that basically arrived in the DC universe, but it didn't work. And that basically established the idea that the Infinity Gauntlets only work in their native universe. But the important thing here is that in this alternate reality, one of the things that happens when the Council of Reeds emerge here is that unlike Galactus in the main Marvel universe, where he has one herald, this Galactus actually has an army of heralds. There's multiple versions of the Silver Surfer. And this is kind of a cool thing because, of course, they basically end up defeating this alternate reality version of Galactus. It happens off panel. We don't actually see it take place, but we're basically told that's what happened. And so when Reed joins the Council of Reeds again the next day, kind of again hitting at this idea that he's just sort of removed from his family, he's there, but he's not there. Like they're having conversations, they're talking to him, but he's kind of like, yeah, that's the thing that we end up picking up basically in universe 8901. Now, the funny thing about this is that this is a world that's being used to create food, and that he's being introduced to this world by the council to show them the breadth of things. Now, the funny thing here is that Reed looks at this and is like, this is awesome, right? Because you're literally growing food on a world in order to feed other worlds in this galaxy. And the response that this alternate Reed gives him is, this is the problem, Reed. You're thinking too small. You're thinking on a small scale. We, as the Council of Reeds, operate on a multiversal level. Our Citadel is outside of space and time, which means that our purpose is on a much grander scale. Think bigger. This is a universe that is largely devoid of normal sentient life. So in this universe, we don't just grow food on this one world. I've got hundreds of worlds where I do this. And we literally bring these resources to other worlds across the multiverse. We just bring it all over the place to worlds that do have life in this universe, but are struggling to make it, and other places across the multiverse. And there's entire universes that I have like this, right? Entire universes where all we do is grow crops and feed other universes in the multiverse. And that's one of the cool things about the council, is it's utilizing the full capabilities of Reed Richards, thinking on a massive scale, a much grander scale. And it's one of those things where Jonathan Hickman writes this in a way to where, while Reed is incredibly intelligent, he is limited by his experiences living among normal people in a singular universe. The average person is not nearly as smart as Reed, and the average person isn't really capable of thinking about things outside of themselves in any one particular world, right? Like, this thing is a major issue, and I feel that way because it affects me on a personal level. If it doesn't affect me on a personal level, I wouldn't give it as much attention as I would to something that does affect me on a personal level. Whether it's selfish is outside of this discussion. That's just simply how it is. But for somebody like Reed, who is capable of thinking outside the box, this is the end result. This is what you find. People building food sources on whole worlds and feeding the multiverse. Now, one of the darker elements of the Council of Reed happens on the third day, when one of the Reeds is like, you've seen the farm, right? And the response of Reed is yes. And so this guy says, it's important that you saw that so you can understand the significance of what we do here. Everything we do has a purpose. And what they're doing here is they're actually facing off against a Dr. Doom in an alternate universe. And one of the things that they do is they basically grab an inhibitor collar. Once they hold him down, they grab an inhibitor collar, and Dr. Doom's just like, do your worst. I'm never going to stop, right? Now, one of the things to know is, again, this is an alternate universe Dr. Doom. This is not Dr. Doom from the main Marvel universe. But the whole reason why Reed was shown the farm before he was shown this is because this is one of the dark realities of the Council of Reeds, that in truth, what they came to realize is that Dr. Doom's quest for power is insatiable. He will go to any limits in order to attain absolute power. That in a lot of ways, he's even worse than Galactus. Galactus does what he does and he wipes out whole worlds because it's his role in the universe. For Dr. Doom, it's just about acquiring power. And that's one of the things that they realized, is that at the end of the day, he literally wants nothing more than absolute power. And so in any one universe, Dr. Doom is literally the most dangerous villain there. And so what the council does whenever they come across a version of Doom that makes his move and starts trying to acquire absolute power is they lobotomize him. And then when they do that, they stick him below a council. They stick him in what's called the hole, right? This place, this deep below the council chamber, and all these Dooms just stand there. That's all they do, right? They can't think, they can't do any of that stuff. And so that's kind of a really, really dark element of the council. But one of the other things they do here, and this is one of the cooler elements, is outside of like providing food and resources for universes or worlds that may not have them, they also play another part of their humanitarian effort in the sense that what they do is actually save worlds from destruction. In this particular instance, what they do is use their technology to enter into a universe and then grow to a colossal scale, bigger than a star, and literally perform surgery on this star because it's about to go supernova. And that removing this piece of matter that's going to lead to the collapse of this star, making it go supernova and then converting into a black hole and wiping out all life around it, is they've literally saved an entire solar system. They saved a whole star system. But that's what they do here, right? That's literally the things that they do, is they work on saving the lives of other people who were out there, other realities, any number of things. However, as awesome as the council is, everything goes belly up, because what ends up happening is, as they're in the council, right, just kind of doing their thing and they're talking and so on and so forth, that essentially there is an incursion, right? The gateway is breached, and like the council itself is compromised, and their whole stance is, what in the hell happened, right? Like what's going, like what force could possibly invade the entirety of the council? And that's when you end up finding out that what had happened is there was a version of Reed here in the council that traveled to an alternate reality. And what he had done is that he had realized in that alternate reality, the Celestials had gone crazy. The Celestials had lost their minds and basically started fancying themselves gods, and presumably wiped out any cosmic entities that stood in their way, and then started forcing the denizens of that universe to worship them as gods. But when this alternate reality version of Reed went there, his belief is that he could destroy them, he could defeat them, and free that universe from their yoke of oppression. The entire opposite happened. Instead, this alternate reality version of Reed was taken by the Celestials, by the Mad Celestials. His mind was quote unquote torn open, meaning they basically forced their way into his mind and started reading all of his thoughts, learned about the Council of Reeds, and that in doing so came to this realization: if they can invade the Council of Reeds and then steal their technology, their ability to enter in and out of alternate realities, that these Mad Celestials can take over the multiverse. And so they do exactly that. They arrive here and just start killing everybody, right? All but one of the leaders from the Council of Reeds are destroyed. So one of the things we learn here is that one of these Reeds has the ability to open portals to other realities just by the nature of his body. And the truth about this is that one of the surviving leader of the council with an Infinity Gauntlet is like, we need you, right? The reality here is that this Reed, this portal Reed, his body will burn out. It won't be able to handle the strain of being used as a vector for an Infinity Gauntlet. But nonetheless, the alternative is that all the Reeds are destroyed in the council. And so what the leader does, or at least the remaining leader, is with the Infinity Gauntlet on one hand, he reaches through the portal, which establishes him as existing in the reality where the Infinity Gauntlet came from. It's one of those things, as long as you have one hand in that universe, you can use the Infinity Gauntlet, and in doing so, uses the power of the gauntlet to destroy one of the Celestials. Now, there are others who are there, and this is one of the things to know, is that when it comes to what's happening here, it's all happening so fast that even the power of the gauntlet is limited, because when it comes to the Infinity Gauntlet, yes, you can alter reality on a cosmic scale, but all this is doing is basically allowing this version of Reed to channel the power of the Infinity Gauntlet in the form of like concussive blasts. But the reality as it exists here is not the reality the Infinity Gauntlet comes from. So you can't like turn the Celestial into something else, right? You can't just like whisk it away or wipe it out of existence or anything along those lines, because they're not in the universe that Infinity Gauntlet comes from. Does that make sense? I hope it does, because it's the best way I know how to explain it. But what ends up happening is the main Marvel Universe Reed takes off to his own universe and ends up basically grabbing a whole bunch of arms and armament and then bringing them back to the council. And that when they have those weapons, they're able to basically use them to annihilate some of the Mad Celestials. Not all of them, but basically force the Mad Celestials to flee, right? To literally take off back to their alternate reality for fear of being completely destroyed. And so with the immediate threat basically abated, the version of Reed whose mind was taken by the Celestials, he establishes to the main Marvel Universe Reed that now he's lost his intelligence. He's not nearly as smart as he used to be. And that's when the main Marvel Universe Reed is like, look, man, we can take you back to my reality and we can fix you, right? We can make you better. And the response of this alternate Reed is, but like, what if you can't? Because nothing's more important than my intelligence. And that's when you learn really the darkest truth of the Council of Reeds, because the main Marvel Universe Reed is like, what are you talking about, right? You have your wife, you have your kids. And that's when this alternate reality Reed is like, no, we don't. That's the price we pay for forming the Council of Reeds. We left our families behind. The reality here is that solving the problem of everything, Reed, requires absolute focus. And so what happened with each of us is, in joining the council, our attention was taken away from our families and focused on here. We didn't necessarily abandon them in the most tried and true sense, in the form of the fact that like we joined the council and they just never saw us again. The truth about this is that as time progressed, Susan Storm in each of our realities got frustrated because she was raised in the family family on her own, that our sons and our daughters, Franklin and Valeria, they began to learn to hate us because we were absentee fathers, that our friends, Johnny Storm, Ben Grimm, they turned their backs on us because we were never there for them. The truth is that we were there with our families, but we weren't there. We were always basically just ignoring them because we were focusing on other things and feeling abandoned and alone in each of their own ways. They turned their backs on us. So we did the only thing that we felt we could do in that circumstance. Instead of basically making amends with our families, we ended up joining the council full time. And that's when the main Marvel Universe Reed is like, that's never gonna happen. I am not doing that with my family. Now, that right there is the single most important decision that Reed Richards makes over the course of the story. I want you to remember that. I want you to remember that singular decision where he refuses to turn his back on his family, because that is the entire basis behind Hickman's Fantastic Four. That's the whole basis behind it. Everything that happens over the course of this story, all the good and all the bad and the really bad, that all happens because of that decision that Reed made, not to abandon his family. It's the single most important thing. And so ultimately Reed walks away, and this alternate Reed is like, you're gonna come back, man. Like, it's going to happen. You're not gonna stay gone. You're absolutely going to come back here. And so what this does is it actually jumps to a flashback between Reed Richards and his father, Nathaniel Richards, who, depending on what reality you're talking about, Nathaniel Richards will actually go on to become King the Conqueror. This particular Nathaniel Richards, he doesn't. But it is one of those cool things. One of the things that I also want to establish is that Nathaniel Richards is going to become incredibly important to this story as time goes on. But the reality here is that for reasons that weren't initially explained to Reed, Nathaniel was not always there. Nathaniel was not always a main part of his character. Instead, what ended up happening is Nathaniel was always just kind of there and not there, right? He was, in a lot of ways, the version of Reed, or those different versions of Reed from the council that were there, but just sort of absentee. And so there comes a point when he visits Reed and says, like, I have to leave, right? Like, I have to go. I don't know when I'll be back. I don't even know if I will be back. And where Reed wants his father to stay, the response of Nathaniel is, I've taught you everything that you need to know, right? I've taught you everything to make you a great person. And this is the influence on Reed that led him to make the decision that he did in abandoning the council. Because what his father told him when he was young is, you have a gift, Reed. You are, and potentially will be, the smartest man in the world. But having all that intelligence is useless if you don't have a heart to go with it. Because the ability to empathize with people, the ability to look at another human being and to say, even if I haven't necessarily lived your life and I cannot experience your actual emotions, I can understand the pain that you're going through, and I have a desire to help you through it. That's what will make you great. That's what will differentiate you between a hero and a villain. So keep that. Do not lose that. Never, ever, ever lose your ability to care, right? I want you to become a better man than I ever was, and I want you to become a better father. And the result of this is that Reed basically ends up walking away from the council and rejoining Susan Storm, who was literally on the verge of feeling that Reed just doesn't care, that Reed just doesn't want to have anything to do with him, that they don't really matter to him, right? It was Reed pulling himself back. Now, what this does is this switches over to the birthday party of Franklin Richards. Now, for those of you guys who are very familiar with Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four, you'll notice that we're skipping over this segment with Ted Castle. The reality here is that in order to make that make sense, we need to cover the Mark Millar story with Ted Castle and all that before we cover that particular segment here. It was something that I realized not too long ago. But the birthday party of Franklin Richards is the most important thing that we are covering in this video. And here's the reason why. So again, it's Franklin's birthday and everybody's having a rip-roaring good time, right? Like, it's not the birthday party that we're focusing on, don't worry, although it is cool, but it's like it's the cutest thing ever, right? Like, Franklin's having a great time, you know, they're celebrating everything. And in fact, it's one of those situations where like Ben Grimm's like, hey guys, I have a special guest for you. And they're like, who's that? And he's like, it's Spider-Man. And it's obviously some guy who's not Spider-Man. And like all the kids are like, that's not Spider-Man. And then Ben Grimm's like, well, that's weird. I could have sworn I saw him around here somewhere. And like Spider-Man's like hanging on the back of Ben Grimm. And the kids are like, that's Spider-Man. It's a blast, right? It's just an absolute, like, just amazing time. And so as a gift to Franklin Richards, and this is one of the things that I want you guys to keep in mind, as a gift to Franklin Richards, Peter Parker basically takes Franklin on a trip around the city. Now, we don't really see the trip taking place. It is kind of a cool thing. That whole situation will be stupendously important. The relationship between Peter Parker and Franklin Richards, that's going to be astronomically important later on down the line. But that's not the important thing that we're talking about here. Instead, like, all the kids are filling up on cake and everybody's just having an amazing time. But the night ultimately begins to wind down, right? Everything begins to come to a close and all that kind of stuff. And what it does is it switches over to later on that night, right? And then there's an alert that comes in on the security system, timequake, condition red. Somebody's coming in through the time stream, right? This person emerges and it's just like containment field is activated and the clock is running. And as expected, here comes company, right? The Fantastic Four immediately respond. Now, as soon as they get up here, they can't pass through this guy's barrier. Now, this is one of the important things that I want to establish here. The fact that the Fantastic Four cannot get past this guy is a huge deal because Susan Storm is the queen of force fields. And you're going to see how powerful her force fields are by the time we get to the end of the story, because people sleep on how powerful Susan Storm is. They don't realize how powerful this chick is. She's a monster, right? Just an absolute demon on power. And so this guy literally shows up here and Franklin comes wandering out, right? Franklin Richards just comes wandering out of his room. And this guy immediately seizes Franklin and the Fantastic Four are like, what in the hell, right? This guy lifts Franklin into the air, says something to him, and then Franklin just passes out. And then following that, he goes into the bedroom of Valeria. Now, here's the thing. What he tells Valeria, this is incredibly important because this sets the stage for all the stuff we're going to be talking about next over the course of this run, right? When Valeria's like, who are you? This guy's like, I was sent to find you, right? And to give you a warning that the future must be avoided at all costs. And he says, listen closely because each word I say was chosen carefully. It is just for you, Valerie. No one else can know this. There will be a war between the 4 cities. The dead must not be forgotten. The future man must return to save the past, and all hope lies in Dr. Doom. And so this girl's like, why should I believe you? And the response is because you are the one who sent me here. And so following that, this guy teleports away. Now, with that whole situation unfolding, with this man just being here and then disappearing, everything kind of goes back to normal. Reed has analyzed everybody, he's studied everybody, there's no real effects or anything like that, not that they're aware of, but the reality here is Reed has no idea what was done, because what we do is we transition back to the room of Franklin Richards. And this guy, literally, when he seized control of Franklin, said, rest and remember what you are. And this little kid, this God kid, this kid that has the ability to virtually alter reality on a universal scale, where his powers have spent all these years being shut down and blocked by Reed Richards, are woken up. Franklin Richards now has the ability to alter reality on a universal scale. And you are going to find out just how far-reaching these powers are and just how stupidly broken Franklin Richards is by the time we get to the end of Jonathan Hickman's run. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.